In this lecture, we will define pandemic and differentiate pandemic from epidemic. We will also discuss the difference between deadly diseases and infectious diseases. Just because a disease is deadly does not necessarily mean that the disease is infectious. The word pandemic comes from the Greek meaning all people. Pandemics begin as epidemics. Now, an epidemic is a local outbreak of some disease, and I'm sure you're all familiar with the seasonal flu epidemics that might sweep through your families, your schools, and your communities. A good example of an epidemic is a typhoid fever outbreak that occurred in the ancient city of Athens, Greece, around 430 BC. Now, the causative agent of typhoid fever is the bacterium Salmonella enterica. Known historically as the Plague of Athens, authorities believe that 1/4 of the soldiers in Athens died, as well as 1/4 of the entire population of Athens, and this took a span of just 4 years. Devastating for sure. Remarkably, though, Salmonella enterica is so virulent, in other words, it's so powerful in its ability to cause infection, that its victims died before it could be appreciably spread through the population. So in this particular instance, typhoid eliminated itself from the population before it could mature into a pandemic. Pretty amazing. Typhoid was self-limiting. Some diseases are able to spread to neighboring communities and further to neighboring countries on the same continent and even further to other continents. Once the disease spreads to affect many people over a large region, that is multiple countries, multiple continents, and even worldwide, then the epidemic officially becomes a pandemic. While a number of flu pandemics have occurred throughout human history, for example, the Spanish flu pandemic of the late 1900s, seasonal flu outbreaks, regardless of the scope, should never be construed as pandemics. We should note here that a disease is not a pandemic merely because it's widespread or kills a lot of people. In order to be classified as a pandemic, the disease must be infectious. Infectious diseases are those which obviously can be transmitted between organisms. So by definition, infectious diseases are contagious diseases, and a good illustration is cancer. Many people died of various forms of cancer every year and around the world. Cancer, though, however deadly, is not infectious, and therefore cancer cannot be labeled a pandemic. The World Health Organization, or WHO, describes a process by which a novel virus moves from the first few infections in humans through to a pandemic. Now, the disease usually begins as an infection in animals. The disease is then transmitted to a small number of humans. As the infection spreads between humans, more and more people are affected until ultimately the disease agent can be identified over many countries and continents. In 2009, WHO Representative Dr. Keiji Fukuda said this, quote, "An easy way to think about pandemic is to say a pandemic is a global outbreak. Global outbreak means that we see both spread of the agent followed by disease activities in addition to spread of the agent," end quote. Now that you understand what a pandemic is, we want to answer the question, what factors are necessary for pandemics to happen? In other words, what pieces of the puzzle must be in place before an epidemic becomes a pandemic? Join me in the next lecture to find out.